Beyond Reason Radio.
So this from the Times of Israel, Mohammed al-Zahar, who is one of the co-founders of Hamas, says Gaza border demonstrations are peaceful resistance bolstered by a military force and by security agencies. He says, we are deceiving the public about peaceful protests. This is from one of the co-founders of Hamas. His exact words. He says, this is not peaceful resistance. Has the option of armed struggle diminished? No, on the contrary, it is growing and developing. That's clear. He said, so when we talk about peaceful resistance, we are deceiving the public. This is a peaceful resistance bolstered by a military force and by security agencies and enjoying tremendous popular support. He also bragged about all the weapons that they have in Gaza. And he said this is a clear terminological deception, saying it is peaceful resistance. I'm going to be talking a lot about what's going on in Israel and between Israel and the Palestinians after moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Of course, that move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem is really just a small part of the story. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. We are until 9 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. I have a lot of different stuff to get to. I want to get into my thoughts on Trump's foreign policy and the reaction to Trump's foreign policy. It's really interesting. Obviously, he's made a lot of different moves dealing with foreign policy. And I want to talk about what I think about what he's doing and why the reaction I just don't buy. So we'll get into that in just a sec. But we also have Mr. Tom Benson, who is producing tonight as well. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Pretty good. Another episode of Beyond Reason going in the book. So,
speaking of the Palestinian uprising, did you see the video of the guy walking around on crutches during the demonstration?
I did not see, but I heard about this.
He was, on for 30 seconds. And then at one point, he just picked up his crutches and started running.
Yep, exactly right. There's so much there with the Israel-Palestinian thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go into a little bit in a sec of the background of Hamas. I mean, it's not hard to look it up. Just look up Hamas's original charter. It's on Wikipedia. Just look it up yourself, and you can find out what Hamas is really all about. It's not difficult. And all you have to do is look up. So there were 60 people killed on the day that they moved the embassy. Look up. It's out there. The information's out there. Who were those people? 50 of them, I think it was like 52 exactly, I have the exact number here, were members of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and a few others were members of Islamic Jihad. 50 of the 62 people killed were Hamas. That's coming straight from Hamas themselves.
There was another viral video running around where they showed a group of maybe 20 so-called bodies covered up, and as the camera's panning from right to left, one of the people underneath one of the covers apparently had an itchy nose because he moves his hand up and scratches his nose.
And Hamas has been known for doing stuff like this for years. For years they've been known for doing stuff like an itchy nose. The dead guy had an itchy nose. He had to scratch it.
That's right.
But I want to step back a little bit and talk a little bit about Trump's foreign policy. Because, I mean, here's an opinion piece from CNN by Nick Robertson. All I have to do is really read the headline. It says, Trump's simple worldview is good for his enemies and bad for his allies. Now, why is it good for his enemies and bad for his allies? What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about Trump pulling out of the Iran deal. He's talking about Trump's tough talk before on North Korea. And he's talking about Trump moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Why is this good for his enemies and bad for his... Because the allies were afraid. No, you can't do that. The enemies won't like it.
You'll tick them off.
They won't like it if we move it to Jerusalem. See, you have to understand what Trump's thinking is. And it's not just Trump, it's people in his administration and people on the right. They're tired of this ideology that is especially prevalent in the Obama administration. But there was an ideology, a thinking, that the best way to deal with problems in the world, to deal with our enemies of the world, is to basically pander to them, is to basically be nice to them, and they'll like us more.
Don't upset them.
Don't upset them. The Palestinians in Gaza, they'll be so mad if we move the embassy to Jerusalem, which is Israel's capital. It's just recognizing reality. It just is. But they'll be mad. We could have had peace, but now we can't have peace because you did this. This is absurd. It's completely absurd to think that we were anywhere closer to peace with Hamas, with the Palestinians, by not moving the embassy to Jerusalem. It's just not true. But there is a thinking out there that this is what we have to do. So it's like with Iran. Iran wants to develop nuclear weapons. Why? Because they want to dominate the Middle East. And they want to dominate against Saudi Arabia and other countries out there as well. So what do? We say, please don't make nuclear weapons. Please don't do it. Just limit what you're doing, okay? And they're like, no. Well, what if we give you back billions of dollars? What if we give you billions of dollars back? Will you do it then? No. Okay, well, we'll just make it for like 10 years, okay? Or till 2025 if officially. Oh, okay.
Give us the money, though.
Yeah, well, we'll take the money. And yeah, okay, fine. Okay, good. Because you'll be nice now, right? You'll be nice. We give you all this money. We're doing what you want. You'll be nice, right? Please don't make those nuclear weapons, please. Please. Okay, well, give us all that money. Okay, but you'll be nice, right? No. We're still going to expand our influence in the Middle East. We're still going to fund Hezbollah. We're still going to take over parts of Syria. We're still going to basically start to run the Lebanon. We're going to do stuff in Yemen. We're going to do stuff with Hamas. We're going to build rockets that could possibly carry nuclear weapons in the future. We're going to still do all that. But, okay, we won't build a nuke for a few years. And if we do, we'll hide it. Okay, good. Okay, see, we were nice to them, and now they're gonna be nice to us. It's the same thinking. And Trump comes along, and he says, "I'm changing it up. I'm tired of this idea that we have to pander to our enemies, and then they'll be nice to us because it hasn't worked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk tough to North Korea, and I'm going to put the harshest sanctions you can possible, and I'm going to let them know you don't mess with us, or you'll be destroyed." And North Korea is like, okay, maybe we should talk to them now. Now, there has been some backtracking on that this week. There's a lot of different speculation on why that is. I find it very interesting that the backtracking from North Korea is not coming from Kim Jong-un himself, but other people in the country, in his regime. So I think there might be some internal division there. We'll see what happens there. So far, Trump is just saying, basically, we'll see what happens. The meeting is still on. They have no indication that the meeting is off. But when it comes to Iran, Trump's saying, you know what? Iran is still a really bad actor in the region. And we've basically given them a ton of money to continue to be a bad actor in the region. How about we just stop that? How about we just stop letting them get all that money and we reimpose sanctions because they're not changing their bad actions. And then it comes to what's going on with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And the Israelis and the Palestinians, I have heard my entire life about peace talks. And most of the time, Israel has been willing to negotiate and been willing to give them some kind of two-state solution. And most of the time, it has been Hamas, and before that, the Palestinian Authority under Arafat, who rejected it. And they rejected it because they believe that Israel is, quote, the Zionist enemy and doesn't have a right to exist, and that Jerusalem should be the capital of the Palestinian state. These have not changed. This thinking has not changed. So Trump comes along and says, well, this has been going on forever. You know what? How about we just support Israel? And how about we just recognize reality, and we're going to show the Palestinians that we're not going to put up with their BS anymore, and we're going to play hardball here. And that's what's happening. And then when the Palestinians, they got mad and they got upset and they tried to storm the border and Israelis fought back, well, it's Trump's fault. It's the Israelis' fault. It's not Hamas's fault or the Palestinians' fault. Amazing how that works. Amazing how that works. I mean, this piece in CNN by Nick Robertson, this is how he ends the piece. He said, Trump's willingness to oversimplify his foreign policy choices is backfiring. The past 7 days are proving to be the most pernicious in recent U.S.-European relations. Previously unshakable bonds have corroded and the Middle East is wobbling way off kilter. The Middle East has been wobbling way off kilter for years now.
60 years at least.
Yeah, exactly.
In our lifetime.
Right. I mean, we've actually controlled a lot of the problems in the Middle East by fighting ISIS. Mm-hmm. And we actually have made allies in the Middle East that we didn't have before. And in fact, Israel is making allies in the Middle East that they didn't have before. Israel is now basically allying with Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan.
Incredible, huh?
Who would have thought that's possible? But no, the Middle East is off kilter and it's all Trump's fault. And he ends it here. He says, none of this is normal and none of it is going back to the way it was anytime soon. None of this is normal. That is the point. That is what the left doesn't understand about what's going on. And they continue to misunderstand why people voted for Trump. People voted for Trump because they were sick of the normal. They were tired of the status quo. They wanted someone to come in and shake things up. They wanted someone to come in and stop with the normalcy because the normalcy wasn't working. So Trump comes in and that's what he does. And we're like, oh my gosh, this isn't normal. And it's like, that's the point. You know, when talking about what's going on in Israel today and the Gaza Strip and about the Palestinians attacking the border and the fight there, people were saying, well, if we didn't recognize Jerusalem, this wouldn't happen. Now, that's not entirely true because part of the reason they're protesting and storming the border is because it's the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. So that's definitely part of that's not being reported, but that's part of why they're protesting. It's not just the embassy move.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it reminds me, because they're blaming, oh, well, if we didn't move that, the Palestinians wouldn't be as upset. It kind of reminds me of, you're going to think this is a weird, I always make this comparison, but it reminds me of The Dark Knight. It reminds me of the Batman movie. If you have not seen The Dark Knight, Chris Nolan's Batman, second Batman movie, you have to see it because there's so many life lessons in that. But sometimes I feel like Trump is the Joker, and sometimes I feel like Trump is Batman. But what happens in that storyline is there's mob violence taking over Gotham. So Batman comes in, and he basically is really hard against the mob violence. He shakes things up. He totally is unorthodox and fights against them hardcore. And people are like, wow, this is great. But then what happens? The mob gets desperate. And the criminals get desperate, and they become more extreme, and then they hire the Joker. And things get kind of crazy with that, and people start dying again, and people are in the city kind of goes into some turmoil. So what happens is everybody in the movie starts blaming Batman. They say, this is Batman's fault. If Batman would have never fought against the mob like he did, we wouldn't be in this mess today. It's that same kind of thinking. And basically what the movie's lesson is, it's darkest before the dawn. You have to really fight hard, and you have to, because the enemy is getting so desperate, that shows you're winning. What's happening now is it shows we're winning against the Palestinians right now, and Israel's winning because they're getting very desperate. And they're fighting back, and it's causing some violence. But it's always darkest just before the dawn. That's what it says in the Dark Knight movie, and that's where we are today. Trump is shaking things up, and a lot of people don't like it. but he's changing things for the better in the big picture in the long run. And this is coming from someone who's not the biggest Trump fan. I was not, as you know, I wasn't the biggest Trump fan. There's still a lot of things Trump does that I don't like. But when it comes to a lot of this foreign policy stuff, I understand the thinking. Because it's like, we're tired of this pandering to our enemies. We're just sick of it. Why? Why is it necessary to be nice to our enemies and think that's going to work? They're not doing that with us. That's not their thinking. 407-916-5400. You can text to 23680 where standard message and data rates apply. We're going to play some voices of reason of the day on what's going on in Israel with Hamas, and I'm going to give you some facts on that as well. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
So this from the Times is Israel as well. It says, I was at the Gaza border. We did all we could to avoid the killing. This is by Kinley Terpaz. He was there at the Gaza border, and this is what he said. He said, I want to testify that what I saw and heard was a tremendous supreme effort from our side to prevent in every possible way Palestinian deaths and injuries. Of course, the primary mission was to prevent hundreds of thousands of Gazans from infiltrating into our territory. That kind of invasion would be perilous, mortally dangerous to the nearby communities, would permit terrorists disguised as civilians to enter our kibbutz and moshav communities, and will leave us with no choice but to target every single infiltrator. That's why our soldiers were directed to prevent infiltration in a variety of ways, using live ammunition only as a last resort. The IDF employs many creative means of reducing friction with Gazans and uses numerous methods, most of which are not made public, to prevent them from reaching the fence. In addition, over the past few weeks, there have been serious efforts to save the lives of children and civilians who have been pushed to the front lines by Hamas, which is done on purpose by Hamas to make Israel look bad, who are trying to hide behind them in order to infiltrate and attack Israel. He says, when there was no alternative and live ammunition must be used to stop those who storm the fence. He says, a situation where thousands of people, there were something like over 40,000 people doing this.
Wow.
40,000, think about that. 40,000 people rushing a border, throwing Molotov cocktails, grenades, bolt cutters to cut through the barbed wire, rushing the border all at once while burning tires. What do you want Israel to do? They're not just holding up signs. They're not just standing around holding up signs saying stuff. They were trying to infiltrate the country, and thousands of them were there. What do you want Israel to do? Israel has had violence in their country in the past. So now they're trying to prevent it because they've seen it. They've seen Israelis killed in their country in the past, and they're trying to prevent it. And because of that, they kill some Hamas terrorists as a last resort, and people are upset. You know, there's a great piece in Mediaite today by Joseph Wolfson. He says, the media neglects to tell its viewers and readers that the deadly demonstration in Gaza was organized by Hamas, a terrorist organization whose never-ending mission is to kill Jews and destroy Israel. Israel did not decide to suddenly start shooting people. Hamas decided to send people to the border knowing exactly what the outcome would be. In fact, buried in the Washington Post report on this, one of the supposed protesters was asked what he would do if he made it inside Israel. His response? Whatever is possible to kill, throw stones. If you take much of what the media's words at face value, there were a collection of peaceful protesters who were gunned down by the evil Israeli Defense Force. And he gives examples of people in the left media saying that. He also says footage was shared on social media that shows there were protesters shooting down an Israeli drone that was dropping tear gas. It must be pretty difficult to shoot down a drone without a gun. Exactly right. He says, it's misleading and just inaccurate to describe those rioting at the Israel-Gaza border as simple protesters. Many of them were terrorists. Back in the United States, however, now you have many in the media suggesting the Israeli response cannot possibly qualify as defense because they didn't lose as they didn't lose any lives in the latest clash. The whole idea is to prevent the loss of life. That's why you fight them. Fight them so you prevent the loss of life in your own country. War is not supposed to be equal. It's not supposed to be we have equal amounts of deaths on each side. It's supposed to win. So you prevent killing on people being killed on your side. It says there seems to be a collective amnesia within the media that is ignorant of the reality that Hamas orchestrated these protests in Gaza. He said, despite the fact that the vast majority of those killed were terrorists, everyone hears about the children who were thrust into danger by Hamas, and talked about how people ran with the story. But he notes that basically they were used. They were used by Hamas because they wanted to get the sympathy. It's exactly right. We have to remember who Hamas is, by the way. I want to play my voice of reason of the day, Alan Dershowitz. By the way, he has a book that he wrote years ago called The Case for Israel. And I actually just recently found it in a used bookstore, and I started reading it. It seems pretty good. But he talked about this on Fox News a couple days ago, and I thought he made a really good point. He was in Israel during the move of the embassy to Jerusalem, and he actually went to Gaza and all that stuff, and he knows a lot about Hamas. And this is what he said about it.
Well, that's the Hamas tactic. It's called the dead baby strategy. You use children and women. You deliberately put them on the front lines. You make it impossible for Israel to defend itself without occasionally killing a woman or a child or an elderly person. And every time Israel accidentally kills somebody like that, Israelis grieve, Israel loses, Hamas cheers and celebrates because that's exactly what they want. They want the media to show the body count. They want the media to show the dead baby, even though Israel tried everything in its power to avoid civilian casualties. Ambassador Haley was absolutely correct when she said that every one of those deaths is attributable to Hamas and that every country in the Western world would have done exactly the same. Look, I was down there in Gaza. I met with people from the kibbutzim. I met with the soldiers. They are terrified.
Yeah, they're terrified of Hamas storming the border. Now, he mentioned Nikki Haley there, and Nikki Haley actually made a comment at the UN about this, and later she would walk out when the UN Council voted to condemn what Israel did. This is what Nikki Haley said at the UN earlier this week.
Make no mistake, Hamas is pleased with the results from yesterday. I asked my colleagues here in the Security Council, who among us would accept this type of activity on your border? No one would. No country in this chamber would act with more restraint than Israel has. In fact, the records of several countries here today suggest they would be much less restrained. Those who suggest that the Gaza violence has anything to do with the location of the American embassy are sorely mistaken. Rather, the violence comes from those who reject the existence of the state of Israel in any location.
So there you go. I think they're both exactly right on that. You know, speaking of Hamas, all you have to do is look up their 1988 charter. On Wikipedia. It outlines what their charter is, what their goals were when they were founded. Now, there's a lot of different things on this, but here, Article 13 says basically this. There is no negotiated settlement possible. Jihad is the only answer. Talking about Israel. Article 14 says the liberation of Palestine is the personal duty of every Palestinian. Article 15 says the day that enemies usurp part of Muslim land, jihad becomes an individual duty of every Muslim, and yada, yada, yada. He basically says that Article 7 describes Hamas as one of the links in the chain of the struggle against the Zionist invaders. So it talks about jihad, it talks about not recognizing Israel, and it talks about them as the Zionist invaders. Now, Hamas did change some of their charter a little bit a year ago, but not by much. They made a new document last year, and which calls for but it still offers no recognition of the legitimacy of the Zionist enemy, which is the term Hamas uses for Israel. Instead, it seeks to draw a distinction between political and religious struggle. Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews because of their religion. Yeah, I seriously doubt that, but okay. But it basically says that they accept the idea of a Palestinian state on the 1967 lines, but this... It says the resistance to occupation by all means and method is a legitimate right guaranteed by divine laws, customs, and international duties. But it offers, like I said, it offers no legitimacy still of Israel. And how do you negotiate with that? If they can't even recognize your right to exist as a country, what's the negotiation?
Who are you going to go negotiate with if you don't exist?
Yeah, I mean, there have been two-state solutions in the past. Usually, it was either the Arab countries or the Palestinians themselves who rejected the deals. Almost every time. You know, Tom Benson, in the break, you were saying, basically, to sum up this topic.
The best example I ever heard of the difference between the Palestinians and the Israelis. If the Palestinians were to be disarmed, you probably would not have any violence.
We would probably have the opposite.
Yeah. I'm not going to say you're going to have complete peace and what have you. But on the other hand, if the Israelis were disarmed, what would you have? You'd have a bloodbath.
Exactly. Well, I mean, think about it this way. Do you think there are any Christians or Jews in the Palestinian areas? No. There are Christians, Jews, Muslims in Israel. Israel is a very diverse country with very diverse political beliefs and very diverse religious beliefs. And they coexist peacefully in Israel as a liberal democracy. Do you think any of those things exist in the Palestinian areas? Of course not. Of course not. It's just, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. If the Palestinians came out and said, you know what, we're going to recognize Israel, we're going to lay down our arms, and we're going to try to coexist with the Israeli state next to us, I guarantee you the opposite would happen. They would open up, and they might actually become a more prosperous area. They might actually get some business in the area. It might actually get a lot of things they need in cooperation with Israel. But they're not going to do that. And
of course
they're spending
not.
all the money. Instead of helping their own country, they're spending all the money for terrorist activity.
This all goes back to the Old Testament times.
Well, yeah.
The hate's been building over, centuries.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. I'm sure Israel has made mistakes in the past. There's no doubt Israel's not a perfect country. But this whole idea that, okay, we're just recognizing reality. And the Gazans start storming the border by the thousands. And Israel defends itself, and somehow they're the bad guy. That just doesn't make sense to me. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. So Seattle has been in the news this week. They have a new plan to combat homelessness. I'm sure you've heard about it. Amazon and Starbucks were not happy with the new plan for obvious reasons. I want to get into a little bit more detail of what this is all about and why the plan is not a good one. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
You know what's beyond reason? Yaffee is now on YouTube. Go to YouTube now and just search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Here's an article I found on Fortune magazine, which I thought was really interesting. It says how Seattle's new tax to fight homelessness could ruin its economy. That's by Travis Brown. It says in a short-sighted effort to fight homelessness, Seattle City Council has approved a new employee head tax on companies based in the city. The policy pits growth and progress against each other in a zero-sum game that will do far more harm than good. Couldn't agree more. The head tax is exactly what it sounds like, a straight levy of 14 cents per hour per employee, about $275 a year for a full-time worker, targeting every business in Seattle with revenues of $20 million or more. The proposal's backers aim to raise around $48 million a year to fund various affordable housing initiatives. It says these are laudable aims, but it's hard to imagine a more destructive strategy for realizing them. Basically because they have to compete with other cities now, where a lot of these companies will go with not this tax.
You betcha.
He says Seattle's $20 million benchmark for the new tax refers to gross receipts, not income, meaning it will hit high-volume, low-margin businesses, think grocery stores or construction wholesalers. So Amazon and Starbucks were really upset about this because it was definitely going to hit their business, but he's pointing out that it could hit a lot of other businesses there as well.
It was originally $500 per employee.
$275 was supposed to be
appeasement.
Yes, the compromise.
And if you make what, $20 billion is it, or $20 million you bill, which is your revenue is what? You said $20 million or $20 billion?
$20 million.
So, if you're a company over there and you say, oh, we're at $18 million, we better stop or we're going to have to get a luxury tax slapped on us.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
They can do that.
Amazon blasted what they said is the hostile approach and rhetoric towards larger businesses, which forces us to question our growth here.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is the thing. I understand why a lot of people on the left, why this appeals to them a little bit, because there is a homeless problem in Seattle, and they look at a big business and they say, well, the big business has a lot of money.
That's right.
And there's homeless people. Why those two shouldn't coexist? So let's just take some of the big business money and give it to the homeless people, and that'll solve the problem, right? And that appeals to a lot of people because they think it's unfair.
Why don't the homeless people go get a job?
They'll argue they can't get a job or whatever, and that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, exactly.
But the point I want to make here is a lot of times when it comes to economics and these decisions, what they don't understand is there's unintended consequences to your good intentions. And you have to think about all of those things before you do it.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, you have Seattle. They want to make it better for homeless people. So what if they make it so good for homeless people and so good for the poor that they have an influx of new homeless people that go into the area? What if they have like a whole influx of new homeless people now because it's attractive for homeless people to be there? So instead of the 10,000, that's how much it's said that King County, the Seattle area, has 10,000 homeless people. Because you've made it so attractive for other homeless people, you could attract, all of a sudden you have 20,000. Then what do? Not only that, but when you tax businesses that are creating jobs that could prevent a lot of other people from being homeless, and those businesses go away, does that help the homeless people in the future? Of course not. It makes the economy there worse, and then you have an even bigger problem. But the other point I want to make is, why don't we ask? Why is nobody asking? And I shouldn't say nobody, some people are asking, but why are people not asking, why are home prices so expensive there in the first place? Why is homelessness such a problem there in the first place? And why not look at that and actually try to solve that problem rather than just trying to throw more money at it? Now, Ben Shapiro, he's another voice of reason I have of the day here. He was on Fox News earlier this week, and he made a good point talking about why this is such a problem. Because the problem is home prices in Seattle have skyrocketed. So why is that happening? Well, he explains it. Here it is.
Yeah, it's not just a spending efficiency problem. They have a massive regulatory problem. What they're using this head tax money for, and this has been a problem in Seattle for literally years at this point, is to supposedly cure the homeless problem. What they're suggesting is that because Amazon has brought in a lot of employees, this is driving home prices up and apartment prices up, rental prices up, which is true. But the reason that the prices are going up is because there's no new supply of additional housing. Right. And that's because Seattle heavily regulates the ability for developers to build anything new there. So they're building no new units there, and then they're blaming Amazon for raising all the prices. Affordable housing in Seattle is not going to solve the problem. They have already affordable housing in Seattle that is being abused by people and has been abused by people for years, going back to, I believe that they were called something like drunk dorms in Seattle because they don't have any restrictions on the people who are actually living in these affordable housing units. The prices continue to go up. Homelessness will continue to increase. And guess where homelessness will really increase? When Amazon picks up and leaves, because there are plenty of states that would be happy to have them without leveraging a $75 million a year tax on them.
Yeah. The best way to prevent future homelessness is a growing, prosperous economy. But the regulatory structure in places like Seattle and doing stuff like these government programs, throwing more money at it, could just make it worse. It feels good. The intentions might be good. But you have to look at reality, and you have to look at facts on the ground, and you have to say, is this actually going to help solve the actual problem? If the actual problem is home prices are too high, there's an easy solution to that problem. Build more houses, up the supply to meet the demand, so eventually the home prices will level off. But they're not doing that. You know, John Stossel had a good opinion piece this week where he talked about this. He said, Seattle's building code is 745 pages long. Woo. He says, if you want to build apartments, you better hire lawyers and fixers to keep you on the right side of the rules. And he goes over a whole bunch of things. He says, want to run a cheap flop house with single rooms? Seattle rules make that just about impossible. He says, if landlord decides to take a building off the market, he must pay each of his tenants $3,000 in relocation costs. These are just a couple examples. So no wonder it's tough. But, you know, I want to go back to, so they're trying to fund this money. They're trying to get $48 million in new revenue to combat homelessness. Okay, that's the idea here. But I looked up how much the King County area spends on homelessness. All the different government agencies, how much they spend on homelessness a year. This is according to the Seattle Times. They did a bunch of research on this, and they put it all together. And the amount of money all these government, this is not including private organizations or charity organizations. This is government funding. Total, $195,588,532. Wow. You realize there are about 10,000 homeless people in Seattle. You realize with that kind of money, you could give every homeless person $20,000 to live in a house with that kind of money. It doesn't seem to me, obviously you can't do that, but it doesn't seem to me that money is the problem. When you're talking numbers of $195 million. I mean, seriously, there's a lot of places you could rent for under $20,000 a year. You could just give them each $20,000 and there you go. Probably, but I mean, that would have other unintended consequences, but it put things in perspective. $195 million, that's $20,000 per homeless person. And that's not enough money. Because maybe the problem isn't government spending. Maybe it's another issue. But a lot of times, when you deal with Democrats and liberals, they don't want to look at it from a free market standpoint. They don't want to look at it from a business standpoint. They want to say, those businesses are too rich and they're not helping, so we got to take that money and give it to the poor. And it's like, no. What would really help the poor is a prosperous economy. What creates a prosperous economy is a positive business atmosphere. And what creates a positive business atmosphere is low taxes that keep the businesses there. And that they create a profit, that they hire employees, that they provide goods and services for people in the area. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
So this show is called Beyond Reason Radio, where I'm the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. But I have a story here. I don't know if it's beyond reason. It's partly sad. It's partly weird. I'm not sure where I want to go with it, but I find it fascinating. So I just had to share it with you. Here's the headline. I got this from theweek.com.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine's Dolphin Army in patriotic hunger strike after Russian capture. There's so many things there that I didn't know were possible in the world today. You just break down the headline. You have to read the story. Ukraine's Dolphin Army?
I didn't know they had one.
I did not either.
Does the United Nations know about this?
I don't know. I don't know if this breaks some kind of Geneva Convention agreement. So that's the first part. And then apparently some
have been captured.
Were captured by the Russians when they, annexed Crimea or something.
Those Ruskies.
And then Ukraine's officials claim that the mammals, the dolphins, starved themselves to death following the takeover of a military base.
Jeez.
So dolphins were so loyal, apparently to the story, to Ukraine that they were willing to starve themselves because they were taken over by, what? This is a thing? But I'm telling you, Dom, this is a real story. Dolphins are we know dolphins are really smart, but maybe they're really loyal. Need some patriot. You think the U.S. Army has
every family should have one,
I guess. It says the facility for training sea mammals in Sevastopol, Crimea is one of several Ukrainian naval assets that fell under Russian control. Hopes had not been high for the welfare of the animals, with Ukrainian authorities making repeated requests to return the mammals to no avail. Some believe the Russians were planning to retrain the dolphins as Russian soldiers. What? This is not from the Babylon Bee or the Onion. This is a legit story.
Sounds like a subplot to a James Bond movie.
Right?
Yeah.
It says now, however, the Ukrainian government representative in Crimea has claimed the dolphins perished defending their country. Boris Babin said the dolphins died patriotically, refusing to follow orders or eat food provided by the Russian invaders, with the hunger strike leading to their eventual deaths. Says the trained animals refused not only to interact with the new Russian coaches, but refused food and died sometime later. Man, so the dolphins, they don't trust, the dolphins don't like the Ruskies. Mm-hmm. They don't like the Russians. Now, some are saying that this is not true, that the issue is not about a handful of mammals who died because they were obviously distressed, be it because of their trainers or for other reasons. However, we can speak about something else that over the course of a few years, unfortunately, our potential in many spheres, including the naval sphere, requires significant improvement. So there you go. The show is Beyond Reason. I try to find stories that are a little beyond reason for you. Apparently, their Ukrainians had some dolphins in their navy, and they went on a hunger strike. I don't know really what to make of the story. I just had to share it because I found it fascinating. All right, I appreciate you listening to the show today. If you miss any of the show, check out the podcast anywhere that podcasts are available. Make sure to like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. Follow me on Twitter @BeyondReasonR. And, well, I'll catch you guys next time.